Episode 15 of the Torque Factor podcast is here, and I'm your host, Scott Brown. This is a place where we discuss all things moving the automotive service industry forward, focusing on expanding knowledge and awareness around tools, equipment, education, and industry trends. This episode's featured guest is Mr. Steve Ford, A.K.A. the Car Guy, who joins us to provide some perspective on the state of the service industry and to take us through some of the historic changes that took place in the 80s regarding the U.S. educational system. I found his observations very interesting, and I suspect you will as well. This episode is sponsored in part by VehicleServicePros.com is a trusted online resource for vehicle service and repair information, fleet maintenance management, and the latest products for servicing America's fleet of vehicles. It's the official website of Professional Tool and Equipment News, Fleet Maintenance, and Professional Distributor magazines. VehicleServicePros.com is on the pulse of the industry, sharing new technology, the latest product information, and market trends to keep our readers in the know-how. All right, that brings us to our recall segment. In February of 2021, GM made three major recalls: 21 Victor-050, 051, and 052. This is affecting about 3.5 million truck chassis vehicles. The passenger airbag inflators have issues with non-desiccated units. The vehicle model years range from 07 to model year 2012. Look to the show notes for links to each of these recalls, and be sure to check the NHTSA website on your customers' vehicles and keep your customers on the road safely. All right, and that brings us to our case study segment. We have another case study from Diagnostic Network, and this comes from Bob Powell out of Massachusetts, and he posted a pretty cool case study here. On a late model Chevrolet Malibu with start-stop technology. And this is a pretty good case study. He's documented a lot of the data, but it does kind of go back to basics. And, this start-stop technology is pretty important. And if you look to the show notes, there's a link that'll take you directly to this case study. I recommend it. It's worth a read. It's great to get that good foundational background information from an actual case study so that you're better prepared to address vehicles with challenges like this. And that brings us to our featured guest, Mr. Steve Ford, A.K.A. the Car Guy, where we take a deep dive on the discussion of education. And we're going to take a little history trip and take a look at what has happened in the U.S. in regards to general education, college education, and so on. So let's have a listen. All right, folks, today I've got my good friend and colleague, Steve Ford, A.K.A. the Car Guy, who is a great friend. He and I have discussed many topics over the years, and he, in fact, was on episodes 1 and 2 during our inaugural launch last year in 2020 and before COVID came in. If you look him up on LinkedIn, you'll see under his title, he's a broadcast journalist, educator, speaker, and I call him a deep thinker. So welcome to the call, Steve.
Thank you very much, Scott. Thank you for the introduction. I think everything made sense except the deep thinker. That just sounds like I'm in the ivory tower sort of.
No.
I think,
you're a deep thinker, but you're at the ground level. So you have the perspective of what's going on there every day. And this is one of the reasons I want to have a call. I mean, normally we're talking about technical things, but, there's a lot of things happening there in the education space. But I wanted to open up with a quote here from John Haywood, who's a professor of mechanical engineering at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And in 2017 or 2018, he was quoted in an interview, and he said simply, "Cars are everywhere. They are one of the most complicated products that we use every day." So given that statement and where we're at in our industry, we continually hear this, language around shortage of technicians, in the industry. And you have a lot of perspective on education and training. And you and I were talking about some things as we're living through this COVID period, and some of the elements around us. So I want you to talk a little bit about your thoughts and where we're at and why we're here.
Scott, thanks. It's such a privilege each time we talk, and I know sometimes we've had conversations over the lunches or a drive to some car event or something where we kicked around some of the observations we share or refine together. And it's funny, I'm a deep thinker at the ground level. That's a great way to put it, because I'd like to be able to influence at a higher level, but I can't be both places. I mean, I think it's not to say that I don't have an aspiration to take on higher levels of responsibility with my career and my achievements, but rather I feel like you and I and others are like embedded car guys or car gals, in the industry, and we see the front lines of our respective paths. And you and I and all the others in your audience share an interest in the transportation world, the technology world, the future of our nation and the globe. And when you and I talk, you are great in allowing me to go wide and far at looking at ideas that may not be inside today's box, as the cliche goes. Outside the box, you allow me to go. So in the earlier discussions we had in your first several Torque Factor shows, I really enjoy talking about what I consider to be sort of the cultural and societal factors that we have to look at connecting with youth. And in essence, if I were to distill those conversations we had earlier, just for somebody who was not with us in those prior shows and may be able to listen to them, but if they didn't have time, I would summarize by saying the trick that I have seen for the industry for the past 20 years is the wake up that I think we've agreed about, and I think the industry and most of in the business of automotive recognize, is that the transformation of public education has taken an already subordinated sector of the national economy, that is the blue collar worker, and always appreciated a good electrician or a good auto technician or earlier term auto mechanic or carpenter or HVAC specialist making their heating and air conditioning system work well. But ironically, until something's broken, the decisions that need to be made each year in education tend to be about what I would say, unfortunately, sort of cavalier approaches to decisions about skilled trades education or career technical education, as it's called today, that have now proven to be catastrophic in what you and I trust you might agree, certainly others would perhaps agree, the catastrophic consequences that are negative for our nation and the workforce, the bell curve of the baby boomers, born through 1965. Last number I remember years ago was 10,000 baby boomers a day were retiring. And we don't have 10,000 new workers coming in behind those people every year. I don't know the number of what we have incoming, but we cannot continue to have this happen without some alarm occurring. And I think to wait until it is one of the next crises, crisis that it can occur in the workforce, it will hit hard. Like economic setbacks that we're feeling might be happening due to COVID and the circumstances, even of the ripple effect of what happened in 2008 to 2011. Is that a fair summary, Scott, of what we looked at?
Yeah, it's a little bit of that's a good summary, but perhaps you can share with our audience a little bit of history of what happened kind of here in the States. You and I discussed this a little bit, and it stems around the trade or the industrial arts in the high school. Why is that missing now from our environment?
Thank you, and I know you're tipping the cards a bit for the audience, because you and I, this is the area we talked about specifically that I think many people would give similar answers. Scott, one of them that you would recognize, of course, is the cost of giving a shop class education is significantly higher than textbooks and lectures in a classroom. Obviously, anybody running an automotive high-end shop, whether it's a dealership or an independent shop, they know the operational costs, the fixed op costs of that business are huge when it comes to software updates, high-tech equipment, tools, and certainly training. And so if we take that into the larger picture of the nation and how California and public education has led Scott, I want to take you and the audience back to something for the first time in a larger audience from me. I say this to you because I promised you I'd come back with this. I spoke to an audience in Santa Barbara behind you. I'm blanking for the name of it. If I can edit this out, Scott, I'm sorry. The Automotive. What is it in Santa Barbara that you spoke at?
Yeah, that's Nikki Ayers, IAPA, Independent Automotive Professionals Association.
I've had the opportunity to speak to smaller audiences in just giving some regional speeches to fellow colleagues in the automotive service and repair industry, and I did a PowerPoint presentation where I wanted to research and go back in time and really try to get to the root. If we trace this thread of where we're at today in a large issue, both in California and across the nation, if we look at the roots of this, I go back, and I wouldn't say this is absolute, like scientific evidence for the birth of this challenge, but when I go back to when the Secretary of Education, T.H. Bell, created the National Commission on Excellence in Education in August of 1981, this created an initiative to examine the quality of education in the U.S. and make a report to the nation within 18 months of its first meeting, that group. And that became what's called a nation at risk. And it was published in April of 1983. And if anybody wants to look it up, for me, finding that, Scott, was kind of like getting to an aha moment where I could say, someone says to me, well, when did this whole challenge start that we're dealing with? And I can tell you right now for you and your audience, from your pal Steve Ford, I say, the publication of A Nation at Risk reflects that reality. Specifically, it cites that the well-being of its people, the educational foundations of our society, are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity. I'm quoting, obviously. I will just say I'm quoting. A rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and people. What was unimaginable a generation ago has begun to occur. Others are matching and surpassing our educational attainments. Well, that's talking about the global challenge, you would understand.
Wow.
It goes on to say, the gains in student achievement made in the wake of the Sputnik challenge were squandered during the 1960s and 1970s. We dismantled essential support systems which helped make those gains possible. Scott, it goes on to point out that the risk is not only that the Japanese make automobiles more efficiently than Americans, but it points out South Koreans that recently built the most efficient steel mill, or that American machine tools, once the pride of the world, are being displaced by the German products. Now, this is 1983, and this was an accurate projection of the challenge. But when you read what I just read to you about what was given up by the auto industry and by the steel industry, it's an incredibly dark irony that this policy, I wouldn't cite as entirely responsible for it. But what this did, Scott, when it highlights what needed to be changed, to tie this to your question, why are we at where we're at today in 2021 and into the third decade of the 21st century? The reality is that nation at risk is singularly cites that one of the greatest challenges, and I'll tie this to some hard data. It says in 13 states, 50% or more of the units required for high school graduation may be electives chosen by the student. And I'll read that a second time. In 13 states of the nation, 50% or more of the units required for high school graduation may be electives chosen by the student. Given this freedom to choose the substance of half or more of their education, many students opt for less demanding personal service courses such as bachelor living, which you'd think I was a comedian reading that. If I said it was, the national nation at risk cites bachelor living as an elective that was acceptable for 1/2 of the graduation credits.
My gosh, that's crazy. This is insane.
You get it. So the next bullet point, minimum competency examinations now required in 37 states fall short of what is needed, as the minimum tends to become the maximum, thus lowering educational standards for all. Goes on to say 1/5 of all four-year public colleges in the U.S. must accept every high school graduate within the state, regardless of program followed or grades, thereby serving notice to high school students that they can expect to attend college even if they do not follow a demanding course of study in high school or perform well. In many schools, the time spent learning how to cook and drive counts as much toward a high school diploma as the time spent studying mathematics, English, chemistry, U.S. history, or biology. Now, I'm going to step away from that so that you and your audience don't feel like I'm going to spend our entire discussion time citing statistics in that the 1983 paper. But that is titled A Nation at Risk, and that term sounds familiar to us. And so the mantra, I think, out of that, Scott, became an attack on electives. And for good reason. If you're taking bachelor living or driving courses and then you're going to go to college, you're not going to be equipped to what to do when on college. So I think the overwhelming movement in public education became an alarm and almost a panic, really, in education to move us into a higher academic rigor. In the process, the skilled trades, I don't think, had a seat at the table. If they had a seat at the table, their voice wasn't heard or their voice wasn't expressed well. I can't be about pointing fingers here. I can only point to results. What we're left with, Scott, to contrast for your audience is something that I confirmed this morning just to go back and revisit it. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Now, I know I'm setting this up like some kind of a punchline and a bad joke, but here's what it comes down to. In the early 2000s, and I haven't been able to see what year it was implemented, but many people and everybody certainly in education will know the term when I say the A through G standards of the UC CSU system in California, the University of California and California State University system. They agreed to jointly embrace this A through G set of standards. The standards of A through G, as someone would understand if I break this down, it is A, history and social science, B, English, C, mathematics, D, laboratory science, E, language other than English, F, visual and performing arts, and then G, where you and I and our colleagues primarily live when we go into the skilled trades. That is college preparatory elective. Now, by that very title, you can feel the haunt of what is being said. It's a college preparatory elective, which means even if you want to take an elective that is automotive technology, that by putting a label on it, college preparatory, as good as that is, and I know you know, but I will tell you, your audience, I'm a educator along the way in the community college level and the high school level, and also for manufacturer, General Motors. So I'm certainly from the skilled trades bias, but I went for a master's degree in education so that I can have that formal degree as a teacher. And the reason I say that is I embrace the academics, and I grew up in a family. My father was a professor of sociology, so you can relate. I was, he wasn't happy about me going into automotive technology, but he ultimately was proud that he knew I was into something I loved and I was motivated to do, which is 90% of why we want kids to be in their respective careers. They want to do a lifetime of this, not hate it. And I love it, as you do. So how's this relevant to the A through G? Well, if it's college preparatory, that is meant that even if you're going to take bachelor living, it has to have, or driver training or whatever elective course has to have critical thinking and some elements of, perhaps sciences or English or other embedded academic subject matter in the critical thinking elements, so that we're trying to, in effect, not only upgrade education and the quality of the range of courses a student takes before being admitted to the UC and CSU system, but we're trying, as I see it, we're trying to make every course fit that college preparatory elective if they take an elective. Here's what's pretty striking, just to summarize and conclude and let you, be sure if you want to direct my path here a bit, but I hope I'm following our line of thought here into some other points about where do we go from here. Here's what's notable. As I just read to you in the audience, in April of 1983, A Nation at Risk was announced as the summary, the white paper, that cited the threat of the Japanese, which is, fractional, really. I mean, God bless the Japanese for Lexus, Nissan, Hyundai, Mitsubishi, Mazda. And I guess I could stop and name them all, but we know the Japanese brands. They're outstanding automobiles, but now we have automobiles from almost, many of the other developing countries in 1983 are now, South Korea's up there with the top automakers, and they were just a glimmer of a vision at the time this paper was written. The machining tool, the machining world of the U.S. and manufacturing worlds have been just, decimated. And it's from the inside out that I point this out. So if we come right back to the A through G, In California, in the early 2000s, the G category allowed how much time was allowed for students to take electives? Well, if you go back to 1983, it said 50% of student high school activity was in electives. Now that's from the Department of Education, 50%. You come to 2021 and you go to the A through G, I read to you, the English, mathematics, and so on. You go to the G category, you have up to 2 semesters of your entire high school education to take 2 electives. You have 2 semesters. They can be chosen from the A. You have 1 year of electives chosen from the A through F courses. Beyond those used to satisfy the requirements that are in the A through F of courses that have been approved solely for use as G electives. So that would be, if you were going to take an automotive technology course in high school, the thing that is ironic, and I would welcome being corrected if somebody can tell me that I'm incorrect. But Scott, you might understand the same thing. To my understanding, if you take automotive technology, the only way that it would be considered credit for the G is if it has an embedded science element, which is fantastic, except you just read at the outset of the quote, that gentleman, Mr. Haywood, is that his name?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, he's expressing what you and I high five about, which is there is no greater STEM education object in the world that is so prevalent and visible and combines chemistry, engineering, mathematics, all into one thing. The science project, if you wanted to work on it, is an automobile. And so his point from a purely academic and scientific and engineering view is that the automobile is the object of STEM, if you really got right down to it. It's not that we want the car to be the way it is today, but as it is, it's the ultimate teaching tool for chemistry, for math, the geometry of a front suspension or any suspension. I trust you'd agree, right?
Mm-hmm.
The geometry it's all geometry.
Right. Yep.
And if you want a kid driving a Honda to pay attention and you can meet him where he lives, ask him if he's interested in having that car corner better. And if he doesn't understand geometry, he'd suddenly understand why camber and caster and offset steering or offset kingpin inclination or whatever the terms we might toss out, in suspension geometry would be relevant. So, Scott, in summary on your question, California has led the nation, I believe, in really aspirational and well-intended desire to push for the highest levels of academics. And in the process, we've watched the electives go from what was obviously, I think, outlandish back in 1983, if you can take bachelor living and expect to get college credit for it. And if that's 50% of your units toward college, I can see the alarm. I think the concluding point I would make from all this is that we've gone from students having 50% electives, which was comical and humorous, except disastrous. It needed to be checked. But the pendulum did not swing too far. It actually bashed into the wall of nobody stopped the pendulum from swinging so far that it knocked everything off the table when it came to vocational education. And then the auto industry came screaming back, trying to be diplomatic. I say this collectively, into the early 2000s and did everything possible all too late. And it was whether it was automotive youth education systems, or any other initiative, all the manufacturer training programs were outstanding for sort of co-op, community colleges working with students in internships or effectively informal apprenticeships at auto dealerships and even independent garages. But that seemed to be sort of many different types of, in effect, not bad designs, excellent designs by the manufacturers and the community colleges. And the private training institutions. But those were largely Band-Aids because what happened was we outsourced, just like everything else was being outsourced in the 80s and 90s. We outsourced automotive education away from the high schools. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's basically, we went away from a vertically integrated to a rather convoluted mess. It's unfortunate.
Right. And you're an adult. You're a successful business owner. You have your own shop. 6 bays? How many bays do you have?
Oh, probably 20 20 bays.
Yeah, sorry. You edit that out. I'm kidding. Don't edit that out. It just goes to show my perception. I can see when I walk in like 8 bays, I think, but I guess I'm looking at one wing of your building, or one 2/3 of your building has one set of bays. So I'm trying to excuse myself from not seeing all 20. I can't. You got a big operation. But you can see where, of course, you're a business owner, you've been an auto shop student, you stay in touch with your high school that I think you went to, or some of the other high schools in your region where you operate a business. The reality is there are auto shop programs operating, but they're really an anomaly. They're not, their outcomes are not measured. There's no testing to prove whether they deliver anything, and there's no allocation for funds directly to automotive programs. They're in a mishmash of funding that can come in varied amounts each year. The main one being Perkins funds that help, people probably know the term even who aren't in education. It goes through Washington federal annual allocations that are seemingly discretionary, not mandatory. They're not in the general fund typically. They're sort of considered like special education or things like this. Scott, the point is for you and your audience that vocational education, and this is where I'll pivot with you, vocational education has been treated like a luxury. Like if we have math, science, foreign language, I need to get my A through G list. If we have history, social science, English, mathematics, laboratory science, languages, visual and performing arts addressed, then we come to the G and we put automotive, electrical, welding, wood shop, HVAC, sheet metal workers, prototype makers, aviation, automotive, train, all the transportation and all the skilled trades of construction trades and so on. Those fall into the G category. Now, an academic educator would counter to me at this point, I think, and say, well, now hold on there, Mr. Ford. We've got engineering and science. That's mathematics, and that's chemistry, and that's physics. And I would say, that's right. Those are all automotive too, sir or ma'am. I'd say in automotive, we're addressing those things, and therefore we are ancillary and integral, quite frankly, to the mathematics and sciences that you're teaching. However, let's reverse this, Scott, and I'll give it back to you with a smirk. You and I, before this discussion a week ago, talked about the reality that, in fact, if we went to the Board of Education or to the Department of Education statewide, California, or nationally in Washington, D.C., and proposed that we have such a shortage of workers and such a shortage of competitiveness in the global stage that we need to emphasize, we need to build a bunch of Thomas Edisons. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think so, and that's one of the things I was going to ask you. If you were sitting in front of a body that said, "Steve, what do we do?"
Okay.
Set it up.
First of all, it's great because the reality is, I'd say, and I'm making a complete hypothetical, and people are going to start sending the nasty emails, and me too, because I'm going to say something outrageous. But I'm saying it just to kid. I'm not saying I would actually propose this. So let me get everybody's attention by saying, what would have happened in the late 1990s if you and I, as we are today, could be, beamed back like Star Trek style and appear in decision-making rooms in the 1990s when a lot of the, strategic decisions were being made about a nation at risk. And we said, well, we differ with these decisions about increased academic rigor. And I know you're recommending 2 years of history and science and 4 years of college preparatory English and 3 years of mathematics. What we'd like to do is we're concerned that we have a glut. We've got a bottleneck of these academic kids who are not going to find jobs as easily as the people in our skilled trades, because we can see that we're going to underfund and undersupport the skilled trades. So, Scott, I don't know about you, but I'd like to move to have us propose that they mothball math, science, English, and foreign languages just for maybe a few years so that we can let the skilled trades catch up again with the globe. Okay. And, of course, you know where I'm going, right? I'm suggesting we reverse the whole picture.
Yeah, that would be outrageous, right? And
right.
Where was the outrage way back then? Yeah.
Well, we weren't at the table, I don't think. And I think it would have been wrong of us to suggest that. And that's my point. It would be equally wrong, I think, at that time to not have a voice, or at least not have a recognition that somebody might say, lean over to the other person. Like I might lean over quietly in one of those committee rooms or conferences where you have 40 people talking, and I might say, Scott, if they eliminate these electives and the skilled trades get sort of mothballed, and if we find that these shop programs are turned into libraries and weight rooms for the football team. That's all great. I mean, the academics are needed, but we're needed. The skilled trades are needed. And you might say, well, let's keep listening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I could see you doing that, you know?
Yeah.
But at the end, I'd say, Scott, I don't know if they realize that Germany never cut back on the skilled trades ever.
Mm-hmm.
Wait a minute. Can I say BMW, Mercedes Benz?
Yeah.
And forgive me,
Porsche.
I want to Audi, Porsche.
Audi,
you know,
yeah.
I mean, I want to be sure I don't skip any of it for the enthusiasts out there. I mean, look at what brands are still chased globally. German brands. They're the high watermark of engineering, and Japan and just in other countries right now are doing spectacular things. I mean, China's obviously deep into the race of technology. South Korea and all the other countries that, you know, in Europe, England, Italy, you know, Ferrari. I mean, when name the brand, you can go to, what is it, Seat in Spain? Does Seat still exist? I guess it does. I think it's Seat in Spain, you know, Renault in France, and these giant automakers. The global stage does not leave room to throttle back and just sort of idle a particular area of education, and yet we've done that. And so that's a detailed, long answer, Scott, to how we got here. We took our foot off the gas, hit the brakes on skilled trades education. That's the bottom line, and all the cargo fell out of the truck, you know, when we hit the brakes. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So given the cards that we got dealt, how do we pivot this forward?
Well, first of all, I would want to emphasize for anybody listening who's a fan of the academics, I applaud that. I mean, obviously, you and I both know that everything that we have of math and science and engineering in our educations along the way is because people made wise decisions to be sure we were exposed to that and introduced to it. And yet, once students get in academics, and they follow a path of education, they go for what? They get a bachelor's degree and then they get a master's degree. And if they really are going to be specializing in research and development, what have you, they'll go for a PhD, or maybe either in research or in some level of the more advanced studies in the academics. Those pathways are pretty well illustrated for students all the way through their K-12 education. Right now, I think the skilled trades are off the map for youth. If you take that emphasis of you have two electives to use in your high school education in California, if you have two electives, where's the high school counselor going to spend his or her time with the student? It's going to be mostly on the academic A through F requirements and not on the G requirements. And moreover, if the student is like many, or if the students are like many, they will probably need to take a remedial course or two when they're in high school, which will use up perhaps the freedom to take any of those 2 semesters of electives. So to your question, what I would submit to you and the audience is that I think that the incumbent worker and professional and community member and community leader and mayor and governor, and then, of course, Washington, D.C. Department of Education and all parties all the way up to that level and our national leadership have to recognize that this is not a smokescreen. This is not some fairy tale, you know, that has gone bad and we can just close the book and move on. We're gonna face the consequences as we are in other parts of our society. And I don't mean it like the sky is falling necessarily, but rather, you know, it's not over. It's not over because we have to live with the outcome. And so the inevitable ahead is that we would either demand that public education do something dramatic, or we would demand that the government do something dramatic. And at the end of those two debates, the public is going to have to step forward. And I propose to you, Scott, that the people in the public who would really rally most effectively and most responsibly, and really like I think our industry has done and can do when we have to rally to do something. I look at Detroit, you know, reinventing itself to become more competitive in the global marketplace of making automobiles. We're now placed, you know, the Detroit automakers, original automakers, have been playing catch up or chase. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say so. And really, there's and this is probably good for another topic, but there's this big shift, of course, going from internal combustion to electrification.
Right.
And, like, what are we doing with all these factories? Where are they going to go?
Right. Oh my gosh, that is a, and what's the best way to go about that one? You're bringing up another strategic tectonic plate movement, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's huge. So I'll summarize in a conclusion here with a few bullet points. Okay. We need to be the voice of youth. I think our industry, as I've said in the prior discussions with you, it's huge that I think we need to get into the space where meet the youth where they are. And I think we spend so much time talking about how to get them to work in our industry, how to hire them, how to treat them, how to mentor them. That's great. What I've also seen in the industry that I think is great, you and I've talked about this, is we recognize that our industry is focused so much on getting the students in high school aware of our industry, whether it's effective or not. And I don't think we've been as effective as we need to be, but I think we've made a great, valiant effort. Obviously, any action is better than no action. Everybody, it's a quote, like you talk about quotes. I love the quote, everybody has the power to do nothing.
Yep.
Yeah. And too many people are using that power. And I don't mean that to make fun of people. I don't think the audience necessarily would disagree or agree, but I hope they would agree with this. If we are not doing something, who do we think is?
Yeah, great question. I mean, it is the great question is how do we engage? How do we engage these folks? And perhaps we can talk just for a minute about some of the newer technologies. You've thrown a number of ideas out there in our previous conversations, and one of them was about this new age that we're in, right? Where there's a lot of powerful video game type applications out there.
Yes, yeah.
And you illustrated what impact that's had on your son, and his awareness of automobiles just due to the fact of him playing a specific game. Do you want to talk about that just for a second and how you think that perhaps this could be something that could be jettisoned into our current environment?
Sorry, I'm embarrassed. No, I really don't want to go near that.
Okay.
I'm kidding. I'll bare my soul. I am a proud father of a great basketball player.
Okay.
He is a incredible basketball player. I crack up watching him even warm up with a basketball. I couldn't handle basketball. I mean, I love basketball. I'm sure you did in high school too, and you and I'd still go out and shoot baskets and enjoy it. But when kids get into something, as you know, he's 16 years old. He's been we had him playing basketball when he was like 3 years old, 4 years old. He didn't know which end of the court to go to throw the ball in. He just loved the basketball and played on a league. So it's in his blood. So needless to say, I have one son. And my dad was an academic, professor of sociology, and he got a car guide for his son. It was like, what has he done wrong? I'm out there in the driveway with grease and tools and cars and engines, in the earlier days. Today it's high tech, right? It's not grease. It's scan tools and electronics. But back, in the dark ages when I was working with carburetors and distributors, right? Like you were as kids, he was disappointed with that. My son is into basketball. I knew as he grew up, if he's into basketball, God bless him. That's great. I was into cars. So I'd pull him into the garage and try to show him what an open-end wrench is or, what a socket set is and what have you. And he would begrudgingly go with me, help me change the oil, for credit in your Cub Scout activity or Boy Scouts, But he wasn't into the mechanical things and he wasn't into the cars. And Scott, the kicker that you're waiting for is I kept hearing about Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto, that sounds awful. My son's going to play a game about stealing cars. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
I just didn't like it. And the next thing I know, and I'm grinning, as you can probably tell, the next thing I know, he wants to show me the Subaru WRX that he's driving or the Corvette that he's driving. And he's telling me about all these different car models, and now he's grilling me about what a turbocharger is and how does it make the WRX faster. And all of a sudden, I'm scratching my head, and I'm thinking, well, I'll be darned. God bless GTA and those people at Take-Two Interactive or whatever the company is that owns the GTA franchise, Grand Theft Auto. Those kids get in there and they get to know cars, they know drifting, they know the different models, they know what it's like to go on and off a freeway, drive down a city street. Needless to say, he drives the sidewalk a lot, does other crazy things, and bounces off telephone poles and gets away with it. That's not reality. But, that's gaming. The fun part that you're touching upon is that, I would say, Scott, to our audience, he's in there having frivolous fun, but he knows a lot of information without even having been told we're going to teach you some things about cars and you're going to love it. If I told him that, he'd say, yeah, sure, Dad. I'm going to go play, Soldier of Fortune or some other, whatever that might be. And I'm going to go with my buddies and we're going to go take down a building of bad guys, and, and yet even in those games, they have to learn weapons, how to undo clips and operate heavy artillery and tanks and what have you. And all of it at the end of the day is they can either go street racing or fight wars. Why can't we teach kids in gaming and have it be we just start to edge our way into all this gaming technology and start to incorporate industry and business into gaming and make the kids learn something that really makes a difference for them? Because can you imagine right now, I don't know what the billion, the numbers are for gaming. I should just to be able to, rattle the number off. But I would say, to tie down your first question here on the future, I'd say it's inevitably in virtual, 3D, immersive, and interactive for youth. We're talking too much about how to recruit youth to our doorstep of our businesses. I think we need to shift our attention over to meet them right where they are. They'll find their way to our doorstep if they want to be a part of what we're doing. Every kid wants to be a part of a tribe. Every child, including ourselves, as we grew up, we wanted to be a part of the hip-in movement. And right now, the hip-in movement is not in hands-on tools, because in public education and in the public in general, we've said presumptively, kids aren't interested in cars anymore. And I think you've heard me say this before. I don't think kids are not interested in cars anymore. I think we are not interested in cars anymore, except when we look at someone like you or me or others who are in the industry, and our friends want to ask us a question like, will autonomous cars, be what we drive within the next 10 years? And questions like that. They're not really asking us those questions we used to be asked. Is synthetic oil better than regular motor oil? And what's the best brand of tire to buy? And things like that. People aren't thinking as much about it because the industry's done such a good job of making beautifully reliable cars and self-serve gas stations and what have you. And that's detached us from hands-on. So I'll hit my bullet points real quick for like 5 minutes.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is just to go where I think you might want me to go, which is some suggestions. If we look at gaming, and let me back up, because you said that you wanted me to illustrate the gaming example. So did I hit that, what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think we covered that.
Okay, so the gaming is a threshold that I think is where the students are hanging out, and I just think that's certainly meeting them where they are. We could really put an emphasis there. But I'm going to give you four major points. The first one is today's hands-on connections with cars. Cars are an on-ramp with no freeway. The kids know that there's shop people working on these things, and the people see the tools and the welders and the electronics and all the stuff that's happening in industry and construction. But we need to engage this next generation beyond the educational vacuum and have more hands-on awareness and lead the industry by saluting and honoring and distributing learning opportunities for kids to discover manual competence. So how? Tap into the challenge and leverage the opportunity of American society to address the loss of the skilled trades emphasis in culture and innovation and enterprise, and inspire others in the auto industry and allied partners in the hands-on field. So I think, Scott, that I suggest that the other skilled trades and automotive are all in this together. And I think that everybody knows a roll away. Everybody knows measuring tools and socket sets and channel locks and vice grips and torque screwdrivers and Allen screwdrivers and Allen wrenches and torque screwdrivers, all these different terms that are used by electricians and technicians and welders and construction workers. We have a uniform base of hands-on learning. So how do we get a successful baton pass to promote and equip hands-on capabilities? Tools, techniques, the culture of awareness, the hobby and passion that we've grown up with. And I think we've got to leverage and influence the untapped capabilities of current and future enthusiast networks, and address the why behind the how of the hobby of American car culture. So kids are driving by auto repair shops and just not even sure what happens inside there. And I think we've made an emphasis on bringing that to the public and bringing it to education. But I think that's got to be geometrically amplified, like, a nation at risk. We've got industries at risk. And instead of 1983 with all that, bachelor living kind of electives, we need to take initiative outside waiting for public education or waiting for the government to step in. So harness and channel new pathways. We need to get the enthusiasts from the auto industry, like me and you, who are car buffs, to connect with youth more. So connect, motivate, and mobilize enthusiasts into local community outreach across enclaves of American culture. We need to engage youth and try to get contagious collaboration, really not just give speeches to schools, but look at having kids invited to Cars and Coffees and really not just have them wander through the Cars and Coffee events, Scott, that you and I have been to, right? We went to one in Orange County. There were 1,000 people there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I just say that the people can do the math with that. It's like, well, wait a minute. Why are we having kids come to a Cars and Coffee and not having some point of engagement with kids? They're just wandering through like they're at an amusement park or a museum. And the reality is every one of those cars has a story, and the kids don't know what went into that, and they do need to. So we need to consolidate with networks of public and private sectors and educators and community leaders to promote apprenticeships and the growth of the industry, and have the young people and the counselors at schools understand that our nation's crumbling underneath their leadership. If they don't draw attention to our fields, we're going to be a nation, we won't be a nation in crisis. We'll be in a disaster. And you and I, correct me if I'm wrong, it's going to happen. It's happening right now. You call a plumber, you call an electrician, they're not sitting there like the Maytag repair person who was, I had to wake up when the phone rang because there was no business.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Maytag.
Yeah, the Maytag man, he would sit there and say, I'm bored, It's the opposite right now. So I think it ultimately comes to the parents and awareness of parents realizing the importance and opportunities for, they don't make $40,000 a year for a lifetime. They start at 30, maybe 20, 25, 30, as changing oil or sweeping floors or whatever they're starting to do. Then they quickly go up as their ambition and their engagement goes up, and they're making 40, 50, up to 70, 80, 90,000. And if they're working in many different positions, they can have a lot of benefits that go with that, that we have to look at as obviously as an industry. So that's the second area is harness and channel new pathways. Third, we have to capture and engage and celebrate childhood youth curiosity into discovery learning. So we need to intercept that youth intrigue with cars at multiple new levels, including the gaming world. And then leverage the pioneer aspects of industry and education leadership by being on the outside, not waiting for education to get funding, because the education community seems to absorb funding. And unless we have a stake in how they use the money, they may mean well, but the money may get sent into other areas than what we want. So I think we need to be stewards of our major funding into education, but not just give it to them. I think we need to decide to bring in our equipment and bring in our training and what have you and make it ancillary right now. And I know that sounds outrageous, but I don't care. I do care, but I want to say for a moment, I don't worry about whether the student gets school credit for it, because that'll come in time. That'll come back just out of the necessity of it. Right now, I think we should realize that public education will not have the funding enough, and the government has many other things to deal with. And if we as an industry don't take this upon ourselves, we cannot keep focusing on getting the students in our door. We have to get to them when they're in their youth. So leverage, pioneer and lead industry via positive forward steps in connecting in the mobile tablet space with synchronous and asynchronous distributed online learning. And synchronous, would mean real time. You and I doing a Zoom call with students, or people from any facet of industry doing Zoom calls with students and offering to give free education and lessons. Asynchronous would mean we could put together videos and information as an industry, and we could have some committee perhaps that vetting of material that goes on YouTube, and maybe make a standard for a volunteer group. Everything I'm saying right now sounds like I'm blue sky, fantasy talking about this, but I can't overlook the fact that even with all the speed bumps that the Boy Scouts organization has hit, and even with any criticisms people might have about the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts or any of these community civic leadership and development groups for youth, the fact of the matter is the Boy Scouts have endured across decades, changing the lives of young people, to have unpaid volunteers, fathers and mothers, come together, wear uniforms, and follow, rule books and directories and information on how to tie knots, go camping, survival skills, community service skills. So my point would be the Boy Scouts already exist, and they have an automotive introduction curriculum. But we in the industry could almost reasonably at this point create something like the Boy Scouts. It's for girls and boys, big and tall, short and fat, all colors and ethnicities and religions and what have you. Just bring everybody together if they want to learn how to use hand tools. Where do they go? well, sorry, we don't have shop classes anymore. Well, what are we doing as an industry? What are we doing in the plumbing trades, in the automotive trade, in the welding trade? There's just great opportunities out there. So I think we need to be the voice of youth and take educational innovation to stratified levels. We need to we need to meet them as the halo of our whatever our skilled trades are in automotive. I think we should be at every venue we can be at, whether it's car clubs, getting involved with Cars and Coffees, or Cars and Coffees by themselves being a magnet for adults and children to really be probably the most visible place, Scott, across the nation right now is that space. So immediate educational tools and techniques to audiences across the nation, multimedia educational technology, virtual 3D, the manufacturers and the aftermarket combining resources, not in any one organization or putting money into any one fund, but making it, dedicating an intentional, selective, focused effort at breakthroughs to move forward, to be sure that every mobile tablet or every smartphone has access to free information for students, and it's got to be visible. And I don't know the short answer on that one, Scott, but I know that if you had a Jay Leno or a Tim Allen, or a Nicolas Cage, I don't know which actor probably would be the one, but somebody recognizable to our nation of parents who's cool and respected. I think that wouldn't be the only thing, but I think that public service announcements and things like this would say, hey, let me give you a quick question. What career offers guaranteed employability, portability to go to any city in the nation tomorrow and have the next 20 to 30 years of employment be most likely?
Yeah, wow, that's impactful. Wow.
Yeah. When I go to speak to parents at functions, or when I go to like Rotary clubs, thank you. I go to Rotary clubs. The first thing I ask is, you're all familiar with STEM, and they all nod their heads. It's like, yeah, we're informed. We're on top of it. You guys are. I get it. So STEM, you would understand, stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And the heads nod again. Yeah, we understand that. And I say, so here, I'm going to ask you a question. I laugh. I say, this is going to get you thinking. If you're creating science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what do you want to produce? Oh, we want to produce engineers. Of course. You're right. And how many technicians does every engineer need to do the engineering job and have it function by delivering to market? And the room goes quiet. Mm. And they start looking at each other for the first person to raise a hand. Hand goes up. 10. I'd say, that'd be great. That's a good number. That's a little higher than the number I've heard. But what does anybody else think? 4. I say 4 is good. It's 4 to 6 technicians for every one engineer. Why is that such a strange thing to be asked? Because we just don't think of it.
Right. Interesting. You mentioned, all your points there are just great, very enlightening. I think, as you were describing the car show event, I just had a visual, big white tent, enclosed, big screen, with some presentation, showing video, really great graphics, but then rolling in the element of, hey, this engine, you just blew the engine. Now you've got to replace it. How do you do it? How do you go about it? And then, like your son was saying, hey, what do I need to do about this turbo? Or how does this turbo work? How does it make more power? And I think
a basketball player asking that a turbocharger.
Yeah, I think that would be a big eye opener. Boy, if we had some element of that at events, across the nation, it certainly would have some impact. I think it would attract. And I think through osmosis, which is how your son has basically learned more about vehicles, this is a great way to draw their interest.
Oh, my gosh. I couldn't ask for a funnier outcome. I've worked with him in the garage. He's changed tie rods with me. We've changed out, throttle position sensors. Tyler is my son. I explain, here's what a throttle position sensor does. You push the gas pedal. The microprocessor needs to know, where is the throttle? Wide open? Is it closed? Is it idling? You ever thought about that? Oh, yeah. When I press the gas pedal, so it gives it more air, right? And then the microprocessor has to add more fuel. So you've got to correspond. How's the microprocessor can't see? It has to have some way of sensing. And so that's a sensor. And a sensor sends a signal to the brain, the microprocessor, and he's kind of nodding his head. But, I can, at that point, his eyes kind of roll back, and I say, I got it. You don't want to learn too much here at once. Okay. But it's kind of there. You got to trust it, But when he plays a video game or she plays a video game, your daughter or son is learning how to operate a tank turret or, or some kind of a semi-automatic rifle because they're taking over a building somewhere. Well, that's really good if they're going to be SWAT or Navy SEAL or something. But I'm sorry, they don't have as many opportunities to be employed as an auto technician or a jet mechanic, a jet technician on the tarmac servicing a 747 Pratt & Whitney, jet engine. That kind of technology, we take it for granted that people are out there fixing our jets and fixing our, I'm fixing the ABS on a car, I want to say.
Yeah.
I'll close on this, Scott. I talked to an educational administrator when I worked for the California Motor Car Dealers Association as a youth outreach representative across the state of California. And I love my work, and I love working with automotive educators and administrators. And but I had to speak with an administrator at a meeting with some other automotive industry representatives from the automakers, including Toyota, and I think Mercedes-Benz was at the table. And this administrator was saying, yes, we're going to be closing down this automotive program. And our question from the auto industry to this panel of administrators in a kind of a town hall meeting in a city in the suburbs of Los Angeles, I asked the question, I said, if students are interested in cars at this school or curious about working with their hands, they're not going to have an opportunity anymore. And the administrator said, well, we have another school across town that they can go to take the automotive, and they can take just that class or something of this nature. And I said, but how will they get there? And the administrator kind of stumbled a little bit and said, well, they can get a ride, from their family or whatever. And I said, there's no established van or commuting thing arranged at this point. Well, we haven't looked into that, but the students have that option. They can get credit at this school for that. And I thought, set up a speed bump like that. I wouldn't say that out loud at the time, but that's just an incredible speed bump. So I said to the administrator, I said, I imagine you probably drive a Lexus or a BMW and take pride in what you drive. And he said, yeah, as a matter of fact, I have a Lexus. And I said, you have anti-lock brakes on that car. He said, yeah, it has anti-lock brakes. And I said, so the caliber of student that you want to work on that car with anti-lock brakes has to be higher than the minimum level person. You don't want to send somebody to work on your car who is sort of a dropout or somebody who's not really ambitious about what they're doing. And he said, yeah, where are you going with this? I said, well, the technology of cars today is not what it used to be. And, the level of training that we need has to be emphasized at a higher level. When we let shop program close, it's almost as if it's going away, and cars are getting more complicated. And he just nodded his head and said, I see that, But I thought, no more questions. The issue is, how can we continue to turn off the power in shop programs and expect those cars with that technology to be safe for you to drive, Mr. Administrator, is what I was leading toward. Eventually you're going to have people lose lives, or we're going to have economic fallout, or a combination of the two, because of this neglect we're having. And we're giving you a picture of the future because your school has to be a reflection of society, and society still has construction, welding, plumbers, electricians, auto technicians. Where are we going to get them if it's so hard for the students to get that education? Because we're not here to tell you they're not needed. They are needed. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a lot of coverage there. So thank you very much for downloading a tremendous amount of knowledge, information, and perspective. I really appreciate that, and I certainly hope that folks out there can, they've gained something from this conversation.
I hope so. Thank you for your time and for their time.
Yeah, perhaps we've spawned some ideas. I'd love to hear from our listeners on their ideas on how to engage youth, and
we need them all.
And bring and attract these folks into our industry, because it's not going to stop at just fixing brakes and suspension. I mean, we've got new things happening, and another deep subject, all the mechatronic stuff, right? So we've got autonomous coming in. We've got a lot of science there. It's just absolutely amazing what's
it's exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, what's happening with our mobile fleet out there, and I'm very pleased and blessed to be part of this industry and actually living and seeing the evolution of where we've come from and where we're headed. It's absolutely amazing. So, again, Steve, thank you very much for your excellent feedback and input on this conversation. And again, I know we'll have you back on.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Scott. Thanks for what you do every day in the industry, for being an ambassador.
That brings us to the Industry Events Roundup. The Technology Maintenance Council, TMC, annual meeting has been changed up for 2021 with 2 meetings scheduled. The fall meeting will be in person, but the virtual meeting held in the springtime will be starting on April 12th through the 15th, and then on the following week from the 19th to the 23rd. Visit tmcannual.trucking.org for more information. And new for this year, the Automotive Service Association, ASA, is hosting their X50 Virtual Automotive Conference and Expo, April 30th through May 1st. Visit asax50.com for more information. The Automotive Training Institute, ATI, 2021 SuperConference is established for May 5th through the 8th at the Omni Amelia Island Resort in Florida. Visit autotraining.net for registration information. The Equipment and Tool Institute, ETI, their Tool Tech event is set up to be a combination virtual and in-person event beginning May 24th through the 27th in Austin, Texas. Visit etools.org for registration information. It will also be co-hosted with the Automotive Maintenance Repair Association, AMRA, and the National Automotive Service Task Force, NASTAF meeting. Additionally, the NASTAF General Meeting webinar will be held on Monday evening. Visit nastaf.org for more information.
Hello, Newman.
And this bit of feedback was provided by Bob M. out of Kennett Square, Pennsylvania, about Episode 7 with Michael Invardson. Hi, Scott. I found it very interesting, your interview with Michael, particularly the discussion of what I refer to as HVAC temperature testing. I am a contract trainer, and one of my major clients is MAX, the Mobile Air Conditioning Society. A number of years back, a MAX trainer, Larry Teray, took the time and effort to comprehensively look at temperature testing as an HVAC diagnostic tool. Larry took the pain to measure a myriad of systems with different problems and then cataloged them to produce a very comprehensive class on the topic. The class was delivered at several of the MAX conventions back around 2015 and is still available as a standalone class from MAX. MAX also developed a DVD for the class, and it's still available from AVI under title LBT 272. Well, we thank you, Bob, for your feedback. And recently, MAX has retitled their association as the Mobile Air Climate Systems Association. And for your listeners, if you'd like to submit your feedback, please drop us a note in our mailbag, podcast@vehicleservicepros.com. And we'd love to get your feedback. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on topics or guests, please drop us a note in our mailbag, podcast@vehicleservicepros.com. Now that brings us to the end of the show, and we hope we were able to bring you some quality content. And we thank you for joining us.